Welcome to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams, where each fortnight you'll hear the stories of industry veterans and learn the secrets to sustainably amplifying value from your software platform investments.
They say a leopard can't change its spots. But what would you say if I told you someone had found a way to innovate on their ERP and make the back office about more than just month end? You're listening to Platform Diaries, and I'm your host, Shane Williams. This is episode 4 on our short series on getting the most from your partner relationships. My guest today is Philip Moon, Senior Manager and owner of the ERP platform at REA Group. We discuss how to go about selecting your partners and platform, how having your partner in the trenches with you unlocks value, what innovation in the ERP space looks like, and Phil's top tips for getting the best value from your SI partnership. I trust you'll enjoy the interview. So Phil Moon, thanks for being on Platform Diaries.
Great. Thanks, Shane. Good to be here.
Now, as you know, this is episode 4 in our series on partnering, and we're taking a little bit of a different turn now. We've had 3 conversations so far with system integration partners, being the likes of IBM, Accenture, and Anexa. And now I'd like to introduce Phil, who will talk a little bit about his career in a second. But for the benefit of listeners, Phil and I came across each other when I was working for realestate.com.au or REA Group a few years back. And Phil's a platform owner for the ERP there, and he'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your career journey, and how you ended up at REA, mate.
Great. It's a bit of a long story, Shane. So when I reflect back on my career, I would say that I'm really happy with where I've landed. If I look back, I think I probably could have done things in a different order. So I finished uni, joined a family business, went overseas to London, came back to Melbourne and completed professional accounting qualifications at a top 4, went back to London for 4 or 5 years and then returned back to Melbourne in 2013. My career, I'm an accountant by trade, but I don't really enjoy that traditional month-end group reporting accounting role. Quite early on in my career, I saw there was a gap between the finance function and the IT function, and I've sort of focused on really trying to learn both languages and be that conduit between both of those groups, which has put me in good stead, and ended up at REA in 2014, where they were about to embark on an ERP replacement project.
Thanks, mate. That's probably a good segue into where we want to go with today's topic, which is around partnering. And, undoubtedly you didn't get there alone without the help of an integration partner. So we'll talk a little bit to that. Maybe you could start by just helping listeners out to understand how you went about not only choosing the platform, but the partner that came with it as well.
So the platform was quite an interesting journey, actually. Look, we certainly started with a traditional list of requirements, nice to haves, need to have, that list sort of across the whole platform itself. Then they wanted to actually try and really prove out the proposition of the platform before we agreed to sort of long-term commercials. So we drew up a short list, we worked through the short list, and then we sort of landed on a preferred option. And then we put this proposal to a preferred option around what we called a proof of concept. And we sort of said, hey, we're really interested in the product. We like what it can do, but we just want to be 100% clear that it's going to deliver value for us. So we sort of agreed with them that we'll take 3 months of time and we'll try and effectively prove that this product won't suit our purposes. And we completed a series of tests across sort of all parts of the platform, integration to sort of basic accounting to reporting, etc., trying to disprove that it wouldn't be suitable. And at the end of that process, we were really happy, and we sort of agreed to longer term commercials with that vendor.
And how about choosing a partner? Was that part and parcel, or was there a process for that too?
So we went to the solution provider, and they had a few options. One of which was we could engage with their professional services, but it was a real sort of a cookie cutter approach, which was a sort of, you'd spend months in detailed documentation and planning and trying to map out what the solution would look like. And that approach just wasn't conducive to the way REA works or the way our tech team works. So we were keen to explore other options, and we spoke to the vendor about other sort of service providers, and we we sat down with a couple of them and worked through with them about their approach and how they would go to deploying the product for us. And we sort of put them under the grill about, could they effectively teach us to deploy the product? We didn't really want to give them requirements and then go away and build it. We wanted to be involved. We wanted to be there sort of in the trenches with them, sitting next to them, trying to learn from them as they went about building the product.
And so I imagine, having had a bit of experience with REA, there's a fairly strong engineering culture and therefore the way that software is developed and built and so forth. So it's interesting that you talk about wanting to learn from the partner how to deploy an ERP. I imagine there would have been some interesting learnings and conversations to go through to try and, let's call it, blend both worlds, so to speak. That's probably worthwhile exploring a little bit further. Maybe I'll start with the software selection. So with NetSuite, was that your approach to say, we want your product for a quarter and we want to try and prove that it won't work? Was that a unique proposition to them, do you think?
Yeah, it was unique. I remember we had to have a couple of conversations with them about trying to get them across what our idea was. And I know that the idea had to go up the chain at NetSuite to get that approval. I think when they came back, they could understand what we were doing, but that sort of unique approach about, we're confident that your product's going to be suit for purpose, but we really want to tick every single box and make sure 100% that it is before we sign on the dotted line for longer term commercials.
And then, that's several years ago, right? So, I'm assuming that potentially the software vendors talking to an organisation of your size and prominence in the market are probably more amenable to those sorts of things these days. Would have been pretty innovative, I imagine, or at least controversial at the time. What about if we switch now to the partners? So, we were talking about a second ago about how you needed them to try to, I guess, teach you, and how would that work with your unique engineering culture? How did that play out?
Well, we actually, I remember having some pretty sort of detailed meetings with the provider at their offices, and we took in our tech lead, and they sort of eyeballed them about their own internal approach to deployments, to code, to releases, to sort of the standard engineering of practice. And that our view was that if they had sort of cutting edge approach, then we could rely upon them to extend that to their engagement with us. And on the flip side, they were also a bit excited about some of the great stuff that REA does in that sort of engineering front. So I think there was a bit of we sort of got a chance to put some pressure on them about how they would engage with us, but they also saw it as a positive to engage with a client like REA. And hopefully that's sort of a two-way street in the end.
And given the topic is about partnering, I imagine, well, I suppose first question, you guys still partnering with those guys today?
Yes, we are, yeah.
Yeah, so then that's a pretty long-term relationship. Do you think, in the true spirit of partnership, do you feel like that's all one-way benefit, that you guys get the benefit of them? Or do you think maybe sometimes the partners, when there is a true partnership, kind of get a benefit from that relationship as well?
Well, I think for it to be a partnership, it's got to be beneficial to both parties. And that was certainly part of the decision-making of us back in 2014, that we wanted a long-term partner with us. This wasn't going to be sort of an engagement by engagement approach. We weren't going to start shopping around for a new provider sort of 12 months down the line. We wanted a partner in the trenches with us, helping us build and extend the platform. As through that relationship, then if we're able to help out within any sort of marketing or any sort of promotion, then yeah, I'm more than happy to help out on that side.
And I know, certainly in my time at REA, there was a long list of people who were looking for opportunities to be able to come and join REA. Do you think maybe your partners are able to leverage that too to attract good talent?
Yeah, I think the red dot, as we call it at REA, that is quite a powerful image. It's certainly well known around the Australian market. So I think if they're able to put that on their marketing around these are some of our clients, then I think that would put them in good stead. I know they're very protective of their clients. They want to make sure that even in their marketing that their clients are represented in the best possible light.
Yeah, I was actually thinking less about their ability to leverage We Work with REA and, in terms of marketing and selling, and more in terms of attracting and retaining talent and the ability to be part of the REA story and journey and engineering culture, but not necessarily on the book, so to speak.
Yeah, well, so the relationship was that because we wanted them in the trenches with us, we sort of had a long-term agreement with them where they would come to our office and they would sit with us. They'd be part of the team. They would learn our ways of working. They would be exposed to our tools, our approach to deployment. And we really saw them as part of the team. They weren't sort of an external consultant that came in to do a specific piece of work. They were in the trenches with us. And hopefully their exposure to our ways of working, they can take to other clients.
I mean, it's certainly something that I advocate for. I mean, there's a couple of chapters in my new book about that specific, is blending the teams and making them feel like they are one, and how you leverage your partner to bring in, you know, skills and experience and capacity, but you don't necessarily rely on them to entirely outsource or insource anything. So it sounds like you've got that playing out really well. So now I might ask you a tough question, mate. Have you ever had reason to consider looking for another partner?
No, we haven't really ever. No, long answer short, no. Like, that's not to mean we don't have some tough conversations with the partner. I mean, they set some really high standards for us. So if on a day or a particular engagement or a particular meeting they don't meet those standards, then it's sort of upon me to have a conversation with them and highlight if and where they didn't quite meet the necessary level. And then what we've found is that they've quickly fallen in and picked up, and we've just moved straight on. So no, we haven't ever thought about going to the market.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I was talking to, must have been Lee in the first episode in this series about partnership and, you know, where things go well and where things go badly and what you do. And I think the lesson there was a strong relationship means that you can nip this stuff in the bud early before it becomes a major problem, and therefore the relationship endures. Sounds like you're in a similar boat. But if you were to consider looking around, what do you think would cause you to do that? Like, what sort of, you know, I guess where I'm going with this is, do you measure certain things, or do you have particular metrics you're focused on, or how do you sort of think about the value you get with the partnership, and therefore what would be your trigger to look or consider something different?
So I would say I'm very conscious about the contribution that this partner makes for REA. Having a partner that comes to work on our platform every day is a luxury. So I'm very aware that I'm in quite a great position to be able to deploy this team. So with that comes responsibility. So it's inherent upon me to make sure that these guys are delivering the value that I think they can. So if and when they do slip below the line, as I said, it's sort of a quick phone call and sort of remediation to make sure that doesn't happen again. The sort of the NetSuite ecosystem in Australia is pretty small, so we have a pretty good idea around who are the partners, any new players, any new sort of small providers that come into the market. So we're pretty conscious around anyone else that's potentially available, but at the moment we haven't really ever had the need to outsource that.
And I think something you said before about the teams being working together, co-located in the trenches together, effectively being one team, probably lends itself better towards, if they are one team, then we would show the team members the same respect in terms of feedback and development, regardless of how their payroll's, right?
Yeah, I think that's also crucial in us. So there has been times in the past where we've had to have a sort of an upfront conversation about a particular event, and I think that's part of the responsibility of being a good partner, is not only paying the bills but also giving that feedback, so that they can become better consultants.
And this is a hypothetical, and it might be difficult to answer given you've not been there, but I'm curious, if you decided it was time to move on or to look at other partners, I've been pretty vocal about that I don't like the traditional RFP process, but would you go through a formal RFP process, do you think, or how would that play out?
No, I don't think so, because we're not really a formal engineering. Well, there are formal approaches in our engineering, but the way we go about things is probably a little bit different to how traditional accounting systems are deployed. So we'd probably adopt REA's sort of slant on that process slightly. So I think it would be more sort of conversations with potential partners about, in this instance, how would you do this, or what are your deployment methods like, or where do you store your code, or what's your learning and development approach? And sort of answering those questions would then give us a really good understanding about their approach, what their approach might be to an engagement with us.
Yeah, I sort of imagined, and I had this conversation with Brendan Connolly a couple of episodes ago about like an agile procurement process, but I sort of imagined that maybe a culture like REA, if you were intending to change partners, might be more of a, get in the trenches with us and prove out something which would show your ability to work with us, use our processes and tools, and prove out the partnership necessarily, rather than a traditional RFP on a spreadsheet process or even a series of interviews. Do you reckon that would work?
Yeah, I think that works well it's good in theory. Some of the deployments you have for an accounting system can be quite complex. There's not many sort of small, I just fix this and take you 2 weeks type engagements. There's normally 3, 4, 5 week engagements so I'm just not too sure how many vendors would sort of, without bigger context, put themselves forward for that type of arrangement.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I hadn't considered, it probably lends itself more to potentially less regulated platforms perhaps.
But I think there could potentially be a conversation around show us something that you've done, show us something innovative that you've done in the past for another client, that talk us through how you came about that, where did the idea come from, what was your deployment like. Those type of conversations I think would be valuable.
Actually, speaking of innovation, that strikes me about something that I'm keen to probably pivot to, and given time, maybe that's where we'll head. So certainly in the period that you've been there, outside of looking in, seeing a lot of acquisition and divestiture, and a business that's growing in several markets and so forth. And I think it's pretty fascinating, some of the innovation that you see REA achieve. And I imagine that doesn't necessarily stop in product. It probably lends itself to platform as well. If you think about some of the innovation that you've been able to achieve in the ERP space, could you talk to us a little bit about sort of what you've been able to do, but also the role that the partnership plays, and whether you think you'd be as successful in that space without the partnership?
Yeah, so this is the stuff that I get really excited about. Like being in accounting and supporting a finance system and supporting a finance function, there's a lot of BAU and a lot of month-end reports and just stuff that needs to be done. What I get excited about is if we're able to solve a business problem using the platform itself. And a few years ago, the business was sort of complaining about the cycle time for purchasing. It was just taking too long to turn around a purchase order from sort of approval to receipt to payment. And we sort of went over the process bit by bit. And the business sort of said, look, there's no visibility of the purchase orders. And we sort of said, well, there is. We send out emails at certain points during the process. And they sort of said, well, the email gets lost. And we went, all right, okay. So then how can we try and solve that the email gets lost? What else can we use? And then REA is obviously very progressive, and Slack's a huge tool at REA. So what we actually did was we were able to configure and integrate NetSuite purchasing communication into Slack. So instead of a recipient getting an email, which potentially gets lost, they got a Slack notification with links back into NetSuite. So on the basis of that, then the cycle time was greatly reduced. So being able to solve a problem using the platform is a great outcome.
I'm interested in that. Does that mean, hypothetically, you could also then use Slack to query NetSuite as opposed to it just being a one-way, here's a link that you can click if you want to look this up?
Well, so that's a good question, actually, because that's the value of a partner. So if we were to go onto NetSuite and said, can you help us out with this Slack sort of integration, they would have said that's not really part of our remit and our skill set. Whereas the partner that's sort of their sweet spot. So funnily enough, we were able to engage with the partner about, could we develop this Slack notification, taking it one step further. And we've actually built out what we call a NetSuite Slack bot. And what this does is it actually returns customer data points. So as you know, enterprise licensing is quite expensive, and not everyone in the business has a NetSuite license. So for example, REA has quite a large customer support team. And so currently at the moment, they don't have access to NetSuite. And there's a lot of great data in NetSuite that team would love to have. So we built out this Slack bot. So what happens is the customer support person gets a phone call from a customer and says, I need to check my balance, or I need to know when my next payment is due, or I need to know what bank account it comes from, sort of basic questions that the customer asks. And so they write a command, and then it goes off and pulls the data out of NetSuite and returns it into Slack. So that's a great outcome because the customer support person's able to answer the query first off, without needing to reroute that phone call to another team in the business. So that's a great outcome.
That's the sort of ideas I imagine come out of things like hack days and whatnot. Does your partnership mean that you're bringing ideas that come from outside the organisation in? Is there value add there, do you think?
So sometimes in accounting, like there's not too many ways you can peel an apple. Like you just have to do a certain report, or you have to process a journal, or you have to process a credit memo, or whatever the case may be. So there's not too many ways to do the same thing. I think a lot of that intuition and a lot of that innovation, the partner might come at it with, okay, here's your business problem. For other of our customers, we've solved it using this or this approach. That may not be applicable, but is there something in the middle where we can pick bits of each of the solutions and come up with an approach for REA is probably where their sweet spot is.
All right, Phil, so now you're in the hot seat. I like to ask every guest for their top 3 tips for listeners. And I think today I'd like to put it to you that what's your top 3 tips for getting the best value from your partnership?
So I think for me, having a partner that is aligned to your values is crucial. So having a partner that's flexible, that understands how you work, that wants to work the way you do, that is in the trenches really with you, is crucial to having a great partnership. I think having a partnership whereby you both understand the level that's required. So if you have an engagement and you have a sort of a retrospective about what that engagement was, and then agreeing, love that we're able to get to this level of output, and then having the conversation around, all right, this is our agreed level of output. This is what we need to be hitting. And if we're not hitting that, then we're having a conversation pretty quickly about why, what do you need, what can we do to ensure that we do try and maintain that level. And then the third one, and probably important, is it needs to be a positive two-way relationship. So it needs to be a relationship whereby it works for you and that you're getting value for money and that the partner's delivering for you. But it also needs to work for the partner, that you're a good customer, you're teaching them, they're learning skills, that they want to come and work on your engagements and they want to be part of your journey, I think.
So finally, Phil, we're up on time, and I think people are going to get a lot of value out of those 3 points. Before we go, I imagine there's some people listening who go, I've heard a lot about REA, this idea of innovating on ERP seems interesting, something that we might not have considered, and maybe we need some tips on how to work with our partner better to get better outcomes. If someone wants to reach out, are you open to a conversation? And if you are, how should they get in touch?
Yeah, sure. Love to help out anyone that wants to reach out. And probably I'd say LinkedIn would be the best platform. Philip Moon on LinkedIn.
Awesome, mate. I'll also put your LinkedIn profile link in the show notes. Thanks for being here today. And thanks for your time. And we'll look forward to catching up soon.
Great. Thanks, Shane.
You've been listening to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams. For more information or to contact Shane, please visit shanewilliams.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.